Hello and welcome to Positive Fandom. I am your host, Rrr Mmmm, and we are doing a review of Andor episodes 4 through 6. And of course, we have Catherine Cooke with us today. How are you, Catherine?
Good.
Excellent. It's always wonderful to have you here to do these reviews. Guys, I'm going to play the promo. Right after I play this promo, Catherine and I will get started with the review. We'll be right back. And welcome once again, everybody. It's Rrr Mmmm. I'm here with Catherine Cooke. And I'm so excited, Catherine, to talk about these next 3 episodes. And I know that a lot of fans have said that they felt that this particular series was slow or it had a slow burn. Some people like it and some people don't. But Catherine, you have to admit, I have to admit that these last 3 episodes have been pretty spectacular. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the slow burn approach really works for this series on the whole because it's Star Wars is nice when it's episodic, but we don't need cameos all the time. We don't need little jokes, and they're actually investing in character and character development, so it actually works rather well. Like the whole 6 episode is pretty much a suspenseful action type episode as the proper anchor point against the first 2 episodes. So I think it's like a very worthy payoff because if you had just jumped into episode 4 with, okay, here's these rebels and off you go and they break in immediately, then it's not really, you don't really care as much about the characters. It's not, whereas they spent a lot of time, and I think that actually elevates the material.
It certainly does. We know that they are invested in these characters. They want us to understand where they're coming from. The writing makes sense. The day-to-day interaction makes sense. We haven't gotten anything like this before. And of course, episode 4 picks up with Andor on Luthen's ship. And Andor is in a bad place. We know he's on the run, and Luthen knows that. Do you think, Catherine, that Luthen was always going to offer Andor money? Because clearly the Kyber crystal is that collateral that he's given. But was this Luthen's intention? Do you think that Luthen thought perhaps that Andor would be willing to kind of join the cause? Or did he have this money as sort of a plan B to sway Andor onto their side?
I think it's a combination of both. It's like, hey, man, I know, because he knows that he only got on the ship with them because they needed to escape. He even acknowledges that, hey, yeah, you could probably try and steal my ship from me. But he's like, hang on a second, I'm going to give you my most prized possession. I'll give you a ton of money just to go on this one-off heist. And of course, that gives Andor pause because he's not sure if he's telling the truth or not. But and I think Luthen, like based on his conversation with the first rebel, what's her name, that he meets when they land on the planet Aldahani, he's like trying to convince her, no, there's something special about this guy. You're gonna have to trust me. And she's like really nervous about it, but you could tell that he clearly believes, or at least is hoping, that Andor is going to be swayed to the cause by the time the mission ends.
Yes, and the idea of Andor being swayed to the cause was something that I still am very concerned about because, certainly as I had discussed with you in our previous review episode, I don't want to see Andor so overly convinced that this rebel cause is right for him. I like him somewhat indifferent. Almost all of the posters and pictures we see of the Andor character, he's not on board. I mean, he's there, but he is not exactly like on anybody's side other than, let's say, I don't even know whether he's on his own side. I think in the back of his mind, and we don't really hear much about his sister in these episodes, but I think in the back of his mind, that's maybe all he can even think about at this point. It might have become an obsession to him, and trying to focus on other things that he has to do just to get by are kind of getting in the way. So I like that he still is very indifferent. It's true that he has affairs with people and does all sorts of dirty deeds, but honestly, I'm fine with it for right now. And I know that it can't go on forever. I know we can't have a scenario that's like that forever, but there has to be some people who are involved and are not like going to, do whatever it takes for the cause all the time. There has to be different degrees of involvement. And right now I kind of like where he's at. And then of course, Catherine, we get to see, I've never seen it before, the Imperial Security Board didn't know it existed, Catherine. And it's a round table. And I love how while they're at this round table, Catherine, they talk about the rebels, or honestly anybody who steps out of line, as an infection. And I want to know, have we seen this before? I mean, are those the Emperor's words, do you think?
Probably, because the ISB has been in the books and stuff like that, so that's the first time you're seeing them, and that's certainly the attitude that they have. But going back to Andor for a second, like you say, he's indifferent, and that was the initial appeal of the marketing for Rogue One. That's like, oh, you have a protagonist who doesn't care about either side, and then that all got thrown out the window within the first half hour, and she's suddenly all gung ho, and it's like, this isn't really interesting anymore. Whereas Andor, like you said, in all the posters of the marketing, he seems kind of off on his own thing, and like we mentioned in our first review, he mentions in Rogue One that I've been in this fight since I'm 6 years old. It's like, well, not really. You're kind of more of a con man, which I kind of like. But even after these 3 episodes, he's kind of warmed up to the idea of joining them, but he's still kind of iffy. So when you have people like the ISB now on their tail, and their whole thought process of everything's like an infection, we're healthcare providers, we have to remove, it's like, okay, you guys are clearly drunk on the Kool-Aid,
Yeah, definitely. And, it's interesting that you brought up that point about him thinking that he was fighting since he was 6. I'm not quite sure why he made that comment, but it might be some kind of internal conflict that he has, because I think as he's grown older, he's realized how much more he could have had, or the fact that he's missed out on a lot of opportunities that many in, the galaxy have, and he doesn't have it. And he's not the kind of man that's just fine with it. He isn't. I can see that he has a little bit of pride in himself, and perhaps feels that he should have gotten, maybe a little bit more privileges or whatever. Life dealt him the cards that he has. But as an individual, I think he realizes that there's much more to life than what he has. And, pretty much as you get older and older, he's starting to realize, I'm kind of just scraping by, and this really isn't a life at all. So, perhaps he's kind of looked at this and is very sour, and he has sour grapes. And it's funny because someone questions him about, well, if you're fine with how things are, if you're, like okay with it, then it's fine. And he kind of approaches the guy and says, well, do I look fine to you? Do I look okay with how things are? And I thought that was a very interesting approach, because clearly anybody who looks at Andor's face can tell he's pissed off about something. And it's not sort of like an angry young man situation. It's much more profound, much deeper than what's going on. And I think that's why Luthen knew he could reach out to him. Now, Aldhani is the planet that they are on and go to, where this entire thing is going to take place, this job, so to speak. And I have heard, you mentioned Vel, who is sort of like the team leader, I guess, of the operation that they're going to be conducting on Aldhani, and then, of course, off Aldhani. I heard a rumor, this is total rumor, that Vel is somehow related to Mon Mothma. And this would not surprise me if she were. But do we know anything about Vel? What do you know about her? Have you heard anything about this character?
No, but what I could tell from her is, on the one hand, she's very paranoid, and even she seems, but also very detail oriented. She seems like the right person to lead it. But then when you meet their contact on the inside, he's a lot more confident, and he's like much more square, ready to go. This is what we're going to do. Whereas during the actual course of the heist, she's really nervous to even initiate it. And it's like, this is your plan. You were concerned about Luthen's choice of Andor for this, understandably. But even when Andor and what's his name have their little, the constant fights in the previous 2 episodes building up to this, she's the one who keeps putting out those fires to say, we got to work together, we got to go. And then when they finally get there for the mission, she's the one who kind of starts screwing up. And I like that, because it adds a bit more layered depth to her character. But as far as whether or not she's related to anybody, I don't know. I haven't heard.
All right. Well, it's interesting to think about, and I heard something about it. And what I'm kind of curious too, Catherine, do you think this is the first time that Andor has ever worked in a team? Because we've seen him it feels like he's kind of an independent contractor, looking out for himself, doing jobs, but he doesn't really have to talk to anybody or interact with anyone at all. And now he's in this team. Is this his first team mission, you think?
Probably. I mean, he's familiar, granted, with everybody back on Miranda 1, and how the community seems to look out for each other and stuff like that. But he seemed even like a loner a bit there, and here it's like he's very nervous. He doesn't like that everybody's looking at him sideways. He clearly has his own way of going, and I assume from the way the first 2 episodes went that either the mission was going to go horribly wrong and Andor was going to be one to save everybody, or Andor was going to find himself in even deeper water by screwing up somehow. And they didn't really do either. They went in a different direction, which I thought was kind of interesting. Because it's like they spent so much time building this up, and it's like, wow, the thing goes, in a sense, horribly awry, but Andor isn't really the one who comes through and saves it per se either. He just happens to be the guy in the pilot's chair. But it's just, so I don't really think this is probably his first team exercise, because they're certainly not behaving like a team.
Yeah, they really aren't behaving like a team. They are fighting. And part of why I think it's difficult for them to behave as a team is because there are some people, I don't know how many, but it seems like there might have been 1 or 2 officers who are part of the team. And sometimes when it comes to officers, they're very competitive. And, the idea of sharing responsibility or being on the same level as your subordinates is not really an officer style thought. You're not on the same level. They're the ones who give orders, and everybody else, follows through on the orders. It's not the other way around. You're not their contemporary or equal. And we kind of do see that a lot. Honestly, in the Empire, it's not unusual, but in normal military procedures, it's how it is. So, I think it's the adjustment of that, especially when 1 or 2 of them come back and find out that Andor has been, now part of the team, and they were not informed, and they're really pissed. They're like, this is unacceptable. But, they have no choice. And of course, kind of at the same time, and I know I've been calling this guy the Gorman character because he reminds me of a character from Aliens, the one who's the commander, and it has hardly any jumps. His name is Inspector Karn, or former Deputy Inspector Karn. He's been fired, and his whole division, Armorlani, is now an Imperial, hotspot now. So they're no longer sort of flying under the radar. But something that's very interesting about him is that when he goes home, he takes something with him. He's supposed to turn in everything when you leave a job, but he didn't. He kept, I can't remember what it's called, the information puck or whatever it's called, on Andor and all of that info. And I wonder what else he took with him, but I have to wonder, and it seems to make sense, Catherine, how will he make his comeback? Because we know that this is not the end of his story by a long shot.
Right. On the one hand, it seemed that they were teasing that he might not continue in the Empire. Like, even when he shows up back in his house, it's like very warm colors. His mom's kind of chiding him a lot, and he doesn't seem to, he's kind of spineless, and I don't picture the Empire even recruiting him back in. But on the other hand, when he's looking at that hologram of Andor, it's not like he's looking at him with envy. Oh, I want to join you. It's like he's mad. He wants to get even. I'm like, you collapsed like a spineless pancake when Andor came up behind you with a gun.
Yes.
It's like, you're not somebody who's going to be able to go toe to toe with Andor. And clearly the Empire's not going to be interested in hiring you back in any positions, because certainly they keep records of everybody. So it's like, is he going to somehow use whatever offers coming through from his uncle to get out of, like, I'm trying to figure out where this is going to go, because so far it's like, okay, he screwed up. He's kind of a coward. I don't find him very interesting at this point, but I am admittedly intrigued as to how they're going to work him back into the story and what type of effect he's going to have. If he's going to continue to be that weasel type guy, or if he's going to find his courage, or how that's going to play out.
Yeah, this is a good question. And it is kind of funny because clearly he has a few cards he can play, although he led his mother to believe that he has no plans, there's nothing. He has a motivation. And not, a lot of times in a lot of the shows that we've been watching, we have characters that we can't figure out what's motivating them. And clearly we can see in Karn that he has motivation, and he'll seize the opportunity. I have a feeling that when his mother, contacts his uncle, the uncle would say, well, would you be interested in working in an Imperial outpost you wouldn't be an officer anymore. You'd be an entry level maybe person. And he would say, yes. I think he would take whatever he can get, especially if it's Imperial related, like what you said. Now, Catherine, how cool was it to see those TIE fighters buzzing around? They did sort of like, the passing shots, the low passing shots in the valley when everybody's there and everybody's like covering their ears because it's so loud. We even get to see TIE fighters get launched.
That was really cool. Yeah, seeing how that docking bay works and how neat that is so cool.
I never guessed we were going to see that. And they didn't just sort of like just give us one. Like they gave it to us in a context. They're walking around. There's one quick hide, and then there's one where the TIE fighters see them in the field and they fly low on purpose just to, F with them a little bit. And then seeing them, these guys in their jumpsuits, I guess it's not a jumpsuit, in their flight suits, put on the helmets, get into those TIE fighters. I was so impressed with the details that they did for this, Catherine. They've got little ladders. They have to go in. They thought about how is this going to look authentic because they know we're watching these details. Also, the sound effects. I have to say, I've never seen TIE fighters so up close and look this cool. It's been a while. The effects on the TIE fighters too, Catherine. I was really impressed by what they did, and I have to give them a lot of credit for this. Just one of the many things that impressed me. Now, I have sort of like a theoretical question. This is a technical question. It's not that important to the story, but I keep asking myself this question over and over again, and the answer is probably no. But I can't help but think about the fact that Luthen, who obviously has a treasure trove of artifacts throughout the galaxy in his shop and probably has thousands of more somewhere. He has assets, but they're private. Not everybody knows what he has off-world. But they keep showing us those holocrons, the Jedi and the Sith ones on the shelf. And then I keep seeing this kyber crystal. And I'm not saying that we're going to get any Force-sensitive people, but I almost wonder whether or not they're going to ever open up the holocron. It could give them information to help the rebels fight the Empire.
Because he says that crystal is his most prized possession. And I'm like, well, he's putting on airs as an antiquities dealer. That's his cover. He's not a guy who likes opulence. Like when he first puts on that ridiculous purple costume, it looks like he's straight out of the 70s. It's like with the toupee and everything, and he's like, he really doesn't like having to put on this face. So clearly, that crystal is not his prized possession because of its monetary value. It's like it means something to him, and it looks like a bit like an actual kyber crystal. And is it something that he's going to use to read the holocrons? Perhaps. I wonder where that's going to go, especially now that Andor gave it away gave it back to Val.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I know that kyber crystals has been used as a weapon. I think maybe in the Death Star or some other. There's a lot of uses for kyber crystals, but they are very valuable. The Empire is desperate to get more and more kyber crystals. Everybody wants these kyber crystals, but this is the first time I've ever seen one, in a story where someone actually hands somebody a kyber crystal. So I feel like that's an important symbol. Of course, it was a collateral just in case the whole thing went wrong and then he could sell it, if the mission failed. But honestly, this is a heist. And, we already know that they're attempting to steal money and why. Mon Mothma gets introduced. And it's funny because the first thing that she says to Luthen is that, I can't get the money you need. Like,
quit bringing in new people.
Yeah. And I have to wonder, and I'm kind of curious as to what you think. Has Mon Mothma been supplying funds all along to fight the Empire? I mean,
that's the thing, because it's implied that when she says funds, I mean, yes, we see that she lives in this wonderfully opulent place, but it's like, and her car is probably the coolest speeder design I've seen in Star Wars, but it's like, where is she embezzling funds, or is she just personally rich? Because we're not really sure. And the fact that her husband is totally bought into the whole Empire and the opulence, why do you have to be so boring and depressing? And you see the conflict that she has with her daughter, and it's like, finally, it's not an orphan for a change. You actually have a real relationship between people in the show. And like when the husband invites Sly Moore over for dinner, and I was like, I thought we were going to see that scene. I thought that would have been great, because she's like, why are you inviting my political rivals over here? And wondering if Sly Moore might be suspicious or something. Because clearly, we know obviously that they're not that suspicious, because Mon Mothma successfully stays in the rebellion the whole time. But I think that's actually a point of interest where we already know where her journey ends. She's going to be a successful member of the rebellion. So how does she get, it's one of those storylines where it's like, ooh, how does she continue being able to avoid, all the radar coming down on her, so to speak? And where is she getting this money? And I guess it's probably from embezzling funds or something like that. But it's nice that we finally get to see her like in her own environment. Like this is where Mon Mothma does most of the heavy lifting for the rebellion. And granted, the Rebel Alliance doesn't really exist yet. It's not an alliance as of yet, and I take it we're going to see that from her in the course of this story. It's like, if they don't they probably won't include the deleted scenes from Revenge of the Sith as flashbacks, which would have been nice, but we're probably going to, in spirit, see her form the Rebel Alliance in the course of this series.
Definitely. And as I said before, she has maintained and continues to maintain that angelic look about her, even though she's under incredible stress. But even when she gets stressed out and upset, Catherine, she doesn't lose her cool. She's able to say what she has to say, express herself, and go on with the day. But she looks so impeccable. And I don't know, I'm seeing impeccable looking characters in Star Wars. She's an ordinary woman. Of course, she's a senator, but just an ordinary woman. It's quite amazing to see her living this lifestyle. And she is very privileged here. Certainly, there are expectations of her to look a certain way, but even in Star Wars, she looked very elegant and beautiful, considering the circumstances. If I remember correctly, I hope I'm saying the right thing, but I do remember seeing her speak, and she did look quite elegant in her white gown. So I think it is very interesting, seeing her here in just her normal lufestyle. Her husband, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm saying that's also one of her key strengths as being able to form the rebellion, is that she's able to keep her cool. Like even Luthen has his little mini breakdown freakouts in the back of his room there at the antiquity shop, where she can just keep calm. Like even when her husband, I'm like, I thought it was going to elevate into like a shouting match. Like, what are you doing? Well, but she keeps it steady. Even when her daughter's getting in her face, she's still keeping it steady, and that's
Definitely.
one of her best traits.
Absolutely. And, I could almost go so far as to say that her husband is a little too laid back, but that's what keeps him partying. He wants to party, and she's ultra serious. And then you have the daughter who's embarrassed by both of them, I guess, doesn't really necessarily want to have anything to do with either of her parents, so to speak. But, thinking about Andor, and let's say, the idea of this guy that he befriends, I think his name is Kareem, I could be wrong, the one who's writing that book. And he starts to talk to Andor about, and this is a quote, the role of mercenaries and galactic struggle for freedom is very interesting, as he has these theories about it. But he's also a very good navigator. And he tells Andor very frankly that he's glad he's there, that Andor is there with them, no matter what the reason. And so I'm starting to think, honestly, Catherine, even, we're talking about 3 days ago. If Luthen hadn't grabbed Andor, could this heist have been pulled off?
Maybe not, because it's kind of difficult. When you look at how the heist goes down, they did feel like they needed another person. And you see how it kind of goes awry when when the Empire figures out what's going on and they start killing everybody. But Andor's contribution is basically that he jumps into the cockpit. He gets saved by the kid when he's getting strangled by what's his name, but he fires the thing up and it's like, we gotta go. And it perhaps would have failed because the other two were concerned about the kid and trying to help him. Where Andor's like, no, we need to get out of here right now, and I need the coordinates like yesterday, So he's actually, and that's kind of, I think, what the kid means is that by being a mercenary, you have to perform under pressure. You can't worry, which is why he's great as a loner, and that he doesn't necessarily need the team effort, but he's the one who kind of excels under the team pressure. Like when the other guards show up and like, what's going on here? And they see their commander injured. They're like, what are you doing? And the guy's like, this is a private operation and you do not have clearance. It's like, really? That's what you're going to say? Did you not have a contingency plan for this? And it just gets into like a, Mexican standoff. But it's, yeah, they needed Andor. They probably wouldn't have gotten out of there if Andor had not been. I mean, if he wasn't in the cockpit, that somebody would have jumped in there, or she would have jumped in and left the kid and just been like, off we go. But because Andor kind of plays along with what they want him to do just up until the very end of the heist.
Yeah, it's a good point. And of course, this heist takes place during this astral phenomenon. And it seems like everybody, whether they're in the Empire or, what their role is, wants to see it. And even the soldiers who are stationed there are angry with the possibility of missing it as proposed to them, even though that is part of the grand scheme. Is the fact that they feel that they should see it an arrogant thing because they're part of the Empire, or do they have entitlement? Do they feel they're entitled to see this? That's not what they're there for. They're not there to see this phenomenon. They're there to be doing their job. What do you think?
It might be a little bit of that, but it might also be because they're just so bored at their jobs, just sitting around doing nothing. Because if you're not under attack or there's nothing stress going on, if you basically have a border security type job, you're just sitting around like a security guard staring at the wall, waiting for something to happen. So they might think that, oh, cool, this is something that's gonna like we could look forward to. Like even you see the few imperial officers and cadets who are standing alongside the villagers, and they seem to be in genuine awe. It's not like they're shoving their way through the crowd to get a better seat. They're all kind of in unison as a group, like experiencing this phenomenon and taking it all in.
And it's very interesting because my first thought, sometimes you think about something like this, you would say, well, what's the best viewing vantage point? And then, Catherine, after we do see this phenomenon, it's pretty much the entire planet seems to have it. It looks like it just bathes, this whole side of the planet. So I think that anywhere would have been a fantastic view, but maybe people want to be outside to kind of experience it. And it might even be somewhat spiritual. But regardless of that, the team is doing this heist. And sometimes we see a few close calls during the mission. So it was not a perfect mission, which is good because that would be so unrealistic. I think you and I both know that that's ridiculous. The idea that it would just go completely fine, no problems whatsoever. I have to wonder whether it was done right or did they have a misstep, for example. I felt the scene with the money being loaded. I had no idea, Catherine, that they were going to make the soldiers at gunpoint load the money onto the ship. I didn't know that. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah, because I remember when they first showed the money in like the 5th episode or whatever, and it's like, okay, it's in this big cave like vault. I didn't realize there was that machine there was actually a vehicle that was docked. I'm like, what? How are they getting this out of here? I'm not really sure. And even during that sequence, I like that they even humanized the leader, the Imperial leader of the base. They have his family there. He doesn't do the typical thing that you see a lot of other Imperial officers in these shows, other Star Wars shows do, where like, you're going to be hanged for this. I'm going to get you. You can't escape. Blah, blah, blah. He's actually genuinely concerned, and it's like he's giving them actual advice. I mean, yes, he's lying at first when he says you can't open it because he's, on the one hand, he's fulfilling his obligation. It's like he tells his wife earlier, and he's like, you two better be on your best behavior because if you want to get out of here and go somewhere better, we have to impress these people. But he's not doing it in an arrogant kind of condescending way. He's trying to keep his cool. He's trying to respect them. You could tell he cares about his wife and his kid. I'm like, that's kind of a refreshing portrayal of the enemy for a change, because they're not, obviously the fact that the Empire actually recruits people rather than using clones means that they have like real emotions. They're like regular people who are joining for different reasons. And so I liked how they were doing that, but even having him at gunpoint load all the money, and yet it's just a simple a telecommunications issue which alerts everybody else at the base as to what's going on. And I was kind of surprised that they didn't really have a contingency plan for dealing with that, because it seemed almost so easy how they stumble onto it, and they didn't have their, they didn't have the doors locked. They just like, oh, all these soldiers are able to just wander in, and we're in trouble.
Yeah, that's a good point. When you really think about it logistically, having a vessel that can move all that money literally right next to the coffers, even though they had like a locking system, is questionable when it comes to just overall, safety, or even I guess this might be considered an inside job, but let's say it wasn't the rebels, if somebody else who wanted to steal it, it was possible. And I think overall, when I think about the anomaly happening and using it as a distraction, I think it worked because even I was distracted, ironically. I felt like it felt as if something else was going on during the heist. And that's not always something that happens to me when I watch a show like this, where I know that they're doing this during a big game or something like that.
They didn't mention in the previous 2 episodes that there was going to be these villagers coming for this festival, for this ceremony. Like, they didn't mention that as part of the plan for a distraction. And granted, they were paranoid and keeping a lot of the plan secret, but it's like, oh, this is like I thought it was like a curveball they were getting thrown. Like, oh, we have to deal with this now. And watching this phenomenon, and I'm thinking, because I wasn't aware that they were actually going to fly a ship out of there and have to go through all this stuff. So I was thinking that something else was going to happen, like whatever was going to go wrong, I thought was going to have to do with what's going on outside. And the fact that some of the guards are distracted, paying attention to this, I'm like, what's going on here? And then it ends up kind of going another direction, which is kind of neat.
It is kind of neat. And personally, honestly, if I were on the surface of that planet watching this phenomenon and I saw ships flying, I would think that this was part of the phenomenon. I wouldn't think, just personally, because it's such a large astral event, I wouldn't think that those are TIE fighters and a ship flying through. I wouldn't think that. I would say, oh, wow. It's like some kind of spiritual thing. And I think that just even from the perspective of knowing how massive this anomaly is. And I think that although we could see it and we knew they were sort of in it, inside of it, I don't think anybody on the ground was aware of what happened. But the villagers, as you mentioned, Catherine, they seemed to know something was up. Like, I have a sense that when one of the officers didn't translate his comment perfectly,
Right. He did. He translated it very differently.
he was like, "What the? That's
Yeah,
not what
because
I
the village
said."
is telling him, yeah, the ghosts have long arms and long memories. Like he's almost like a veiled threat to the officer. But then the other guy decides, I'm not going to tell him that because that might piss him off. So I'm going to tell him something different.
Yes,
So
and
yeah,
I
he
think
probably
that that
knew.
was I think that he knew something was going on. And what did you think of the cultural dancers? You know, because sometimes we have a situation where they have to create other cultures and their beliefs and things like that. I kind of liked their music and their chanting. Their costumes were lovely. Kind of reminded me of Enfy's Nest costume style a little bit. I thought it looked very authentic, and the people, you know, it was a nice culture. I think they did a nice job of recreating culture I've never seen before. What about you?
Yeah, it was like a neat because I remember in the first of these 3 episodes they mentioned that the hideouts they're staying at were for all the farmers and the villagers and the nomads, and they mentioned a little bit about the people that used to live here, and so now we're actually seeing them and how they're fur traders, and even the Empire comes out to deal with them because because they don't want to ruffle the feathers. It's like, yeah, we don't need to go out and kill everybody just because we're just trying to, because in a way that's not really what they're there to do anyway. It's just like a covert bank vault, if you will, in the middle of nowhere. But it is nice how they're kind of introducing a brand new culture to Star Wars and how they're aware of what the Empire's doing and that they shouldn't like them, and they feel kind of confident teasing them about it, but they're still being respectful because they're trading with them, and this is supposed to mean something, and the Empire trades back. So it's kind of interesting that they're kind of, adding real character to this planet. It's not just another barren planet with a couple shepherds. It's like, no, there's a whole culture here.
Yes, and so, you know, you and I have already alluded to the fact that they had to fly that ship out, but I had no idea that they had to fly it into the anomaly. Catherine, did you know this was going to happen? Did you think that the TIE fighters would follow them in? I had no idea. What did you think
Well,
about that whole thing?
I didn't realize at first that this was a vehicle that they were going to be taking off in, but once they did, and it took off like a slingshot, because, like you mentioned, it seems like this anomaly is happening over the whole planet, and it was a little narrow. And I thought, well, can they fly to the left a little bit and go around it? Apparently not. So once they went in, it's like, well, of course the TIE fighters are going to follow them. Like they go into the asteroid field, like Han says, it'd be crazy to follow us. Wouldn't they? Well, of course they're going to follow their TIE fighters. They're going to chase them down. But moving through that navigation, it's like reminded me a bit of Star Tours, where you fly through the comet field in one of the sections of it and have to avoid just getting hit and blasted left, right, and center. And I was wondering if they were actually going to, and the TIE fighters I like are having a hard time, with all the colors and everything and the brightness of it, and they can't really see what they're doing, and they can't get the ship on their radar to hit it, and seeing how they all get taken out. And, of course the heroes were going to make it, but it still felt like, I thought for a while that they might actually crash land on the planet again, and that was going to be the obstacle, because now they'd be stuck here. The fact that most everybody died on this mission was like, whoa, that was kind of a surprise. And maybe the villagers were going to come to their aid or something. So I was surprised that they actually did manage to make it through the anomaly off the planet.
Absolutely. And, just like you, when I saw the TIE fighters fly into the anomaly, I didn't know that they would like have some electrical disruptions, although we know it's an astral phenomenon. So it's probably packed with electrical charges, with matter, with gas, all sorts of stuff that's not great for a TIE fighter. And we even see in the ship as it's going through the phenomenon, parts of the glass and the windshield are breaking. And I'm like, oh my God, that's terrible. They're not going to make it out. It really was very suspenseful. The fact that they still needed the guy who was a navigator, who unfortunately was crushed by the stash in such a horrible way. Oh my gosh, that was horrible. Bad luck, terrible. Oh, it was hard to watch that. And he still had to wake up and be a navigator. And I kind of thought to myself, gee, he has a lot of skills. Outside of this thing, he ends up giving Andor, or bequeathing, whatever you want to call it, this manifesto. And I thought to myself, gee, what's in this book? It's got to be more than just his thoughts. You know what, Catherine? I think what's in that book is everything he's learned about the Empire and his thoughts about how specifically how to defeat the Empire, where their weaknesses are, maybe some of their stations. What do you think's in that manifesto? Is it just thoughts, or is it more?
I think it's more. I think that's also why he sees kinship with Andor, because if you're a mercenary who has been deemed by Luthen to be good enough to, I mean, even though he probably doesn't know Luthen by name, but the fact that you've been deemed worthy enough by the higher ups to go on this mission and you're a mercenary, that means you must have experience dealing with the Empire and getting, ripping them off and stuff. So that's kind of why he's the most friendly with him, and he's the least adversarial of everybody else there. And so, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of ideas, because we can see that Andor's particularly been moved by it. I mean, he doesn't seem to show it at first, but the fact that when you get to the twist at the end, where the guy who was giving him the most grief in the previous 2 episodes is the one who just says, hey, let's ditch her and let's take off. And, oh, I lied to you. I don't have a brother or an orchard and all this stuff, where he was really doing a good job in the first 2 episodes selling it on how this is my lifeblood. This is who I am, rebel and all this. And in hindsight, it's like, oh, you were just doing that because you were afraid that people would see who you really are and you wanted to fit in. But at the same time, when he proposes that we should just split the money and run, I thought, is he bluffing because he just is looking for an excuse to kill Andor because he's just not liked him from the beginning? And I'm not sure, maybe he was, but because on the ship when the kid was injured, he's the one who advocated that they should, help him. He's like, no, we need to help this kid. He's done everything. He's saved us. It's like, okay, so you're still sticking your neck out for the kid, but then you want to basically kill her and rip off the money and then take off. So it's like, or maybe the reason he wants to do that is because he's so bitter about the fact that the kid died that he just doesn't care anymore. I'm not really sure, but the fact that Andor makes the decision to not only say, no, I'm not doing that, but he actually takes it the extra step by killing him and then goes inside and tells Val what happened. Whether she believes him or not is up for debate. But it shows that he actually has been somewhat won over by this kid. It's like he sacrificed his life for this. He believed in this cause. He's written a whole manifesto about it. And even though Andor initially refuses the manifesto, he's like, no, I don't want that shit. And she's like, no, take it. He wanted you to have it. And he's like, okay, well then here, take your friend's crystal. I don't want it anymore. I don't need it. So it's on the one hand, it's like he's trying to divorce himself from the cause. Like, I'm done with your little cell and your little group because this all went awry. But okay, I'll take this and I'm not going to rip you off. I'll at least be kind enough to do that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Like, he's still sort of conflicted, it seems.
He certainly does have conflict. And I'm hearing an echo. Am I hearing an echo? Okay. He certainly does have conflict. And something that I thought was very interesting about this conflict that he has is that we know smack talk exists. We know that. This guy is maybe the only person who's daring enough to challenge Andor. Maybe they got into a fight off, screen. We didn't see it. It's not just sort of like him digging through all his shit and saying, yeah, I know what he has and he's got this thing and who the hell is he? He knows Andor is special. And I think that a lot of the members in the team realize that Andor is not an ordinary man. And so since they realize this, they might be a little afraid of him in that regard. Val isn't afraid of anybody. She's not afraid of anybody.
No, that's why she sticks up for him when he finally admits that, yeah, I'm a mercenary. Well, tough cookie. That's just what I am. Deal with it. And she's like, let's keep going. Whereas the others are like, we don't. Which is why I also thought it was weird that that guy just kept pushing him so hard. It's like, well, if you're telling the truth about just being a con man and wanting to rip them off, then it should. I mean, I guess that's why he might be suspicious, because that's what I like. There's multiple ways of looking at this. Because again, is he telling the truth about just wanting to rip them off? Is he just bluffing because he wants to give an excuse to get rid of Andor? But the fact that he kept pushing him, maybe he was worried that because, like you said, he recognizes there's something special about this guy, he's going to be an obstacle for me to overcome if I want to get away with the money and leave them high and dry. So I got to pick a fight with him and push him away. And then, like you said, Val's not going to take any of that crap, which is why he ultimately fails to dissuade her from bringing him along.
Absolutely. I mean, I certainly feel that the confrontation between the two of them was natural and organic, but I personally am not sure whether the outcome, I wasn't expecting him to shoot him, but I guess Andor has felt that he had to do this. I think he didn't think the man was bluffing. And if he was willing to go ahead and say that he would take the money that way, I guess Andor felt that the guy could go ahead and shoot him in the back too. So I think he figured he had to get the first shot in. We all know he shot first. I didn't see it coming, Catherine. I didn't know Andor was going to do that. But remember, the series started where he killed 2 people in the beginning of the series. So he is capable of making tough choices when it comes to survival situations. And I think that the rebels...
because I thought he had that opportunity he could have lied and said, okay, I'm with you, follow him into the room, and then let Val see that this guy's about to kill her and then save her from it to earn her trust more. Say, I'm not bullshitting you, so now we can have more of an understanding going forward, but he doesn't really care about that. He's like, no, you're kind of a jerk, so you're done. And like and especially after you've given me all this crap for the last few days, and really, and now you just want to. It's like he's like genuinely upset. It's almost as close as he's come to committing an actual murder per se. Because in the beginning of the first episode, it's like, yeah, he does kill that guy in cold blood when he offered to disappear. But he recognized that, yeah, you're saying that now, but once you get back to your base, you're going to tell him everything. So I got to get rid of you. Whereas this guy, it's like he's just deciding. It's like he could have just lied and gone along with it. Because again, he does seem conflicted about what he wants to do here. But he's like, no, you little, and then he just shoots him. So he's still got that in him.
I thought it was one of those situations where he had to make that decision, and he can't relive it because the guy has, as you said, been picking on him through this entire 3 days. And he's like, this might be it. I don't want to be sleeping and have this guy sort of sneak up on me and do something crazy. So he opted on his survival, which was primary. And I think it is very interesting. I think we're going to see Andor make decisions like this where he is taking people out, and it'll be sudden and quick and unexpected, but he's ready to do it. He's ready to do it. And so now that the rebels have this money, and of course we see Luthen with his smiling gaze and all happy, we see the ISB, the Imperial Security Board, meeting for something called the Planetary Emergency Retaliation Plan. And of course, all of us are thinking, yeah, the Empire is going to strike back. We couldn't help ourselves to say that. I didn't even know this thing existed. Have you heard of a Planetary Emergency Retaliation Plan?
No, but it sounds like it could. This planet's out of line. Let's go deal with it. It's kind of like we don't have a Death Star yet, but this is what we're gonna do. Because Luthen was very upset when the guy in his shop says, "Do you have anything from Aldahani?" And at first he's really scared. It's like, why? It's like, oh, there's a rebel attack there. They stole some money. It's all over the news. And he goes back and has like a mini meltdown because it's like, no, we were supposed to get away clean. Yeah, it would be a robbery, but they weren't supposed to know who did it. But the fact that they know it's the rebels and all of that, he's like, oh God, this is bad. And so, because now you are going to have this retaliation plan, and whatever that's going to entail, because it certainly doesn't seem like Luthen has the resources to protect these people on the planet, it's going to be bad. And so I think that's also, whatever the retaliation is going to entail is going to further help Andor maybe sway himself closer to the side of the rebels, because he did, he left he let the girl keep the money, and he just kind of left. It's like, okay, I'll take my share, my 30 grand, and I'm gone. But I'm taking that's going to change once he finds out whatever the retaliation plan is. And I also wonder how this retaliation plan is going to dovetail with the, what's her name, the female ISB officer, who felt kind of like a parallel to the Cyril character. It's like, yes, he had like one you call Gorman. It's like, yeah, he saw how he kind of tried his hand and kind of failed. And then she's getting the same blowback from her superiors as well. It's like, don't investigate this. It doesn't matter. But she's ambitious just like he was. But now that they're doing this planetary retaliation, which seems so much bigger than the murder investigation that they started with, I'm like, I wonder how her story in this investigation is going to dovetail with what's going on here. So that's kind of interesting because it keeps layering the plot like a long form story does.
And I could see her somehow finding out because she wants the records. You remember how she kept asking for the records, and her superior was like, well, you have half as much work, but you haven't handed in your reports. And now you're going off on a side tangent. I'm not cool with that. But knowing her, she's going to get those records. She's going to go to that base. She's going to track down these guys. And I think that's how she might get in contact with him. And when she finds out from him that he has actually met Andor, which I think he will tell her that he believes he was, did he see Andor when he did, right? Remember when Andor had the gun to his head, he looked at him, right?
I think he did, but he also saw him on the hologram, so he knows what he looks like because he kept that hologram puck thing that you talked about. So yeah. And then he heard Luthen when he showed up behind him, and he's like, shoot him. And he's like, fine, you don't, I'll do it. And then the guy, Andor's like, no, let him go. So he's heard that guy too. And granted, they're both on Coruscant in different areas, but he could potentially come across Luthen, and that could be a complicated thing for the plot going forward. Because again, we're still not really sure how this spineless guy who clearly wants to get out from under his mother's thumb is going to figure back into the story in a significant way.
Well, the fact that he has seen Andor in person, and I'm sure the other guys have told her that as well, but he was the driving force of that operation. It wouldn't have happened if he hadn't disobeyed orders. So she may seek him out if she is as thorough, and perhaps that's how he gets back or gets involved in this whole thing again. And finally, one of the last scenes of episode 6 that we see is Mon Mothma addressing the Senate. And I couldn't remember. I mean, I know that there's a scene or a moment where Mon Mothma gives her resignation speech, but this was not the resignation speech. This was a speech about another matter. I think she wanted to have, flight patterns back so that this other planet can get food again. And she is very passionate in her speech. And as she is doing that, there's quite a kerfuffle going on in the Senate. It seems that everybody has heard about what has occurred, that there was a big heist, and they're all checking their bank accounts. They're all freaking out. I had no idea. I knew that they wanted the money, the rebels wanted the money to do stuff, but it hadn't occurred to me that this might affect other planets. Catherine, how dependent are they on this money? How invested are these senators in the payrolls of the Empire?
Well, like you said, the senators, as we find out in the original movie, the original Star Wars, they were kind of puppets of the Empire. They didn't really have any power. They had the illusion of power until the Emperor finally, once the Death Star project was ready, he's like, okay, I don't need you bureaucrats anymore. But they weren't really doing anything. And like you mentioned, I think you hit it right on the head where you said that they're worried about their own bank accounts. Because it's like, okay, there's a heist. Okay, that's bad, but is it really cause for that much alarm and people to get up out of their seats in the Senate and run away? No. But if it's their own bank accounts, yeah, which is probably why Mon Mothma is having a hard time finding money for good causes, because they're more worried about, their own opulence, like her husband is. And I don't see how that relationship's going to last, but but I think that's the issue, because yeah, you stole money that they're probably abusing on their own powers, or on their own wealth, but at the same time, some of that money is needed to help people. And I think that's kind of what they're going to use it for, because they think, oh, the Empire, the system's broken, so we're just going to steal the money and we're going to funnel it into an actual armed resistance because this needs to happen. And yeah, people might suffer a bit as a result, but it's like, the few for the many type mentality that they're taking, it seems.
Absolutely. It certainly was a 3-episode arc that I enjoyed thoroughly. And I think that it was so well balanced. What do you think Andor's going to do with his cut of the money?
So I think initially he might want to just leave. I mean, he might actually help her get the money to where it needs to go. And I think his initial intention to leave is going to be dissuaded when this planetary retaliation event happens. And maybe his conscience is going to get the better of him because he kind of inadvertently contributed to causing all of this. And so he might want to go back and help him. Like you said, the fact that Cyril has seen Andor, that there's this female agent who's going to continue her investigation. Like you said, she's probably going to go knock on his door and say, hey, and they might, all three of them might cross paths at some point. Like there's something, because again, if she goes, because if that, I can't remember her name, but if that female ISB agent goes to see Cyril, asks him everything, like tell me everything, he's going to tell her also about Luthen. That no, there were 2 of them, because he saw Luthen and Andor as well when they took off on their speeders at the end, at the very least. But he also heard Luthen speak. He's going to be able to identify that guy. And I think they're going to be, and that's going to eventually dovetail with Andor. Again, I think his conscience is going to get the better of him, and he's going to try and, like, he has his opportunity at the end of this episode to make his clean getaway with the money, and I don't think he's going to do that. Because I think he's also going to read this manifesto that this kid had. Like, initially he didn't want it, but I think after seeing clearly that the kid cared about this, coupled with whatever the planetary retaliation thing is, that's going to convince him that, no, I need to, at least to give himself peace of mind. Not that he's going to be full-blown rebel gung-ho, but like, I need to at least give myself some peace of mind over this incident. And that's going to help collide these stories together again at some point.
I think you make a good point with that. I think that there's a lot of information that Andor can use that will help him outside of the rebels. Maybe there's information in there that's going to help him navigate the galaxy undetected. And it's because this kid had, recorded it. He's a master navigator. He's very specific in using tools, or at least I believe he's very specific in using tools that cannot be traced but are reliable, very excellent, very reliable and efficient and untraceable navigation tools. That's just one part of it. You certainly don't want to be tracked. We saw Andor make that mistake early on, and Luthen kind of, got angry with him for using something that he didn't control. And I think that Andor is learning along the way, each step of the way about how to gain more control over very important things. So I think that that's going to make a big difference for him going forward. I also was going to say that I really enjoy the fact that we don't know what the next step is going to be. They didn't tell us. So it's a mystery. And, I have to wonder whether or not Mon Mothma is going to lose more charitable causes because of this event that's happened, whether or not people who have promised her money or different things that she needs to happen, it's going to be even more cuts now. They'll, people
Yeah,
will
because
be,
well, on the one hand, she was aware of the plan because she talked to Luthen about it specifically in the back office, and she's like, I can't give you any more money for this. So she knew the heist was going to happen. She probably didn't know that it was going to be as quickly linked to the rebels, which, again, the fact that they are saying that it's rebels and not just, scavengers or thieves or whatever means something. And that's what Luthen, I think, was stressed about. And that's what she's stressed about because, that implies that there's an avenue of investigation that can be followed. Kind of like going back to the Kenobi series, which takes place before this. They're already aware of things like the path. They know there are rebel cells out here. So, I mean, she knew the money was going to get stolen anyway because that was her plan. But, I mean, now that they've had this snag, I mean, maybe it's going to negatively affect her causes more than she anticipated. Because, again, if she planned to steal the money anyway, and you see how these senators are more concerned for their own bank accounts, then it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that her causes then get shortchanged. Because,
well, did she plan to steal the money, or was it Luthen's plan to steal
that's
the
what I was
money?
trying to figure out. Because when she meets Luthen and he says, I'm adding another person, she's like, you have to stop adding people. But they weren't really explicitly clear in terms of how much she knows about what it is that they're doing. Because she clearly trusts him. And then, like you said, we don't know what the next step is because Luthen keeps everything very close to the vest. He's not going to tell, you're on a need-to-know basis type of thing. So I was kind of wondering, it's like, does Mon Mothma, did she know specifically what they were going to do? Is she going to be upset by this and going to go confront? Because the fact that Luthen is also really upset about it, one, because they've tied it to the rebel cells, but is he upset because Mon Mothma is going to be like, you did what? Maybe.
Yeah, it is something to think about, and I like that we have to think about this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not cut and dry. About the only thing I'm assured is that officer from the ISB is going to figure out all the details of who had that navigation device, and I have a feeling that will bring her back to Karn somehow. And when she sees his dedication, somehow that may allow him to kind of come back. Because he might be the best lead. He's heard the man. He's seen the accomplice. He knows what Andor can do. He's seen him in person. There might not be anybody else who has fit all those parameters right now. So, I have a feeling that that's how that might play out. But everything else, I have no idea what's going to happen, and which is fine. I'm excited for the next episodes. I don't know how many episodes are left, but if the rest of the episodes continue with this level of engagement and careful writing and support for all of these storylines and motivations, I'm really thrilled for what's to come. Do you have any predictions, Catherine, for the next episodes of Andor?
I think, I think we're going to see the planetary retaliation, whatever that is. It's going to persuade Andor to hang around longer, and then what's her name is going to knock on Cyril's door, and it's like, because she's been investigating this, so she knows why the Imperial garrison has moved to Morlanda 1 to take over, as opposed to letting the locals run it anymore. She's going to see that this guy got fired over it, and she's going to go talk to him, and that's how this story is going to spiral. But now, how many episodes it's going to take to get there, I'm not sure. Like, it'll be, because we're only halfway through the series, or halfway through the season now, so I'm still, but I like that I'm kind of at a loss as to what the climax of the first season is going to be focused on. So it's intriguing.
It is intriguing. Your final thoughts on the episodes?
I like, it's like a self-contained story in a way, even though it's still long-form TV and building it. And as I understand it, each sets of 3 episodes are each going to tell their own kind of story with a beginning, middle, and end while still continuing all the character arcs. So I am intrigued to see where this next storyline goes. And these 3 I thought were really good. They spent a lot of time on character development. They opened up so many possibilities, like we said, the direction that the stories are going, and not really being sure of who knows what and what's going on, and that keeps it really engaging and worth talking about. So, and further shows the benefit of releasing shows like this on a weekly basis as opposed to just dumping it all at once.
Absolutely. I feel like we need time to absorb these new characters and their stories and understand the context in which they're told. Catherine, where can people find you?
You can find me on the Phantasmagorium Show YouTube channel. Every Wednesday, we do reviews at my co-host, Scotty R37. We're on our Tarantino series now. We've also got a whole catalog of James Bond shows called Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns. We're eventually going to see into the Batman movies and the original cast of Star Trek movies, and so that's fun there. And then every second and fourth Sunday of the month at 8 a.m. Pacific on the Virtual Cantina Network YouTube channel, you can find me co-hosting The Unifying Force, which is a Star Wars philosophy show. So that's really fun.
Fantastic, guys. And of course, you guys can always find me here on Positive Fandom and on the Post Geek Singularity. And so thank you, Catherine, for joining me today for this review. Catherine and I are going to continue to review the Andor series going forward, which has just been so enjoyable to watch. I'd like to thank you for watching the program today. Certainly do check back. If you haven't seen the previous one, check that out. And of course, we have more coming up. So thank you to everybody who's watching. And for all of you out there, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to be kind. Take care, everybody.